Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share tools and perspectives to equip leaders in self-development and team connection. I am your host, Natasha, and I am excited to share today's episode with you. Today, I am sharing a conversation with psychic coach and energy facilitator Mari Roberts on trusting your gut, understanding where intuition shows up in your body, and confidence in trusting yourself. I am really excited to share this conversation with you because I think that as leaders, we have to be open to how we are feeling, both emotionally and physically, so we can truly care for others and perform at our best. Thank you so much for joining me, Mari. I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us your style of leadership and coaching.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me, Natasha. Such an honor to be here. My name is Mari Roberts, and I am a life purpose activator and energy facilitator. I use my psychic gifts and my corporate background blended together to help my clients to truly listen to their hearts so they can live their passions. And my style of coaching is empowerment, but it's also around helping my clients truly connect to that intuition and inner knowing so they can trust themselves and take the steps that they need to live the life that they deserve.
Was there a specific event that occurred in your life that led you to this path, or was it like a series of events?
I'd say it's a mixture of things. I have always been psychic. I just did not know I was psychic, and I will just call it out. No one chooses to be psychic that I know of. And when I moved to the Pacific Northwest in 2017 is when my gifts began to unfold. Again, I've always had that. I just didn't know what it was or what was happening. It didn't require some major car accident, for example, to initiate that. You hear that a lot from people. It was just life unfolding with time, basically. And I had a soul-sucking job at the same time. I was under a lot of stress emotionally, and that led to really me looking at coaching and realizing that I wanted to support people and not experiencing what I experienced, because no one should feel the way I felt, and people should be able to feel empowered to make choices to move on. Marry that together with my psychic gifts. That's how it came to be with how do I help people take action, but also connect to their inner knowing and confidently move forward.
I love that you said that you always had it. You just didn't necessarily label it as that. So prior to you accepting what it was and moving forward with that, what did that look like?
Oh my goodness. So I tell this story, and I've said it before, it's really kind of funny. When I was a little girl and we lived in a particular house in San Francisco, I used to walk between what I would call the Star Trek people. They were protecting my bedroom door and my parents' door. I never said anything about it to anyone, never told my parents, nothing. You know, as time progresses, you realize that that's not what happens to most people. So that was the beginning of it. I'm dating myself. There was a Sunday Disney movie with Dracula, and I did not want to watch it. But my dad said, it's Disney, it's not going to be scary. So we watched it. That night I woke up and there was what I thought was Dracula on my bed. I have later learned that it was probably like a guide or something. Again, I could see things. I just didn't know that I was seeing things, and I didn't know that it was not something that people would normally see. But when I saw this thing on my bed, I was terrified, and I started sleeping with the light on, so I never saw anything again. Fast forward, I started having very vivid dreams. I grew up in Northern California. I grew up in a small town called Redding. So living there, I started having very vivid dreams to the point where I thought they were nightmares, but I knew that they weren't nightmares. They were just dreams that I could not go back to sleep. And sometimes I did not like them, and they could be reoccurring. I would, again, not tell my parents, not mention anything. I would just turn on my light and stay awake until I passed out. And so these are the little things that were always happening that I didn't know were signs of something else. When I started to share with all that they would say was, that makes sense. Well, we always go to you for insight, or, you always know things that we don't know. I just thought it was normal. I didn't know that there was more to it.
What does it mean when someone says trust their gut or trust their intuition?
That is a great question. I think there's two parts of it. We all have gut reaction. Sometimes you don't feel it the same way though, and that's where trusting your gut can feel a little bit untrue for you, because that may not be how your inner knowing, which I think you can interchange inner knowing and intuition, that inner knowing shows up. So for example, you may actually get a gut reaction. You come into a room or you're talking to someone and you get that response like, oh, my gut's telling me that this is no good. Or you can even get the response of, ooh, this is super exciting. I really want to do this or pursue this. You can see that even using examples of searching for a job. You might see a job posting that gets you very excited and you get the gut response of excitement, oh, I'm going to apply for that job. Or even the reverse is, I get a weird feeling. Something is off about that job posting. I'm not applying for that job. And so why I say the gut piece isn't always clear for people is it's also understanding, where does it show up in your body? So I actually have a friend of mine who, when that happens to her legs, actually, she gets like tingling in the top of her legs. So it's about learning, how does that quote unquote gut response show up for you? That's actually something I work with my clients on, is understanding, how does it show up for you? It could be that you get a sensation in the back of your neck. It could be that your hands start to tingle, right? But it's understanding that, again, I'm doing the air quotes, gut response is for you. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. I would say that there was a long time where I would get this tingling or sometimes a more intense sensation, like right in my solar plexus. And for a long time, even though I was like a teenager, I was like, I guess I already have indigestion. So I just dismissed it because, you hear about intuition and you feel like it's something that almost hits you like a Mack truck. And you're like, this is my inner knowing. When I love that you said that it just shows up differently for different people.
Right. It shows up differently for different people. And it's also, you gave a great example. You dismissed it. You used your rational brain to say that's not possible because you perceive it's supposed to be something else, when in all actuality, that was your inner knowing giving you a response of, oh my goodness, yes, go do this thing right now, or yes, this is a hell yes or a hell no for you, right?
Absolutely. So with any person, it's important to listen to our intuition, but with leaders, why do you think it's especially valuable for them to listen to that and trust it?
Well, it's an interesting time, I believe, that we're in, because leaders so often are told that you've got to have the data, that you have to be able to articulate clearly the story. And I'm not saying that these things are not true, but there are times that you have to trust the unknown knowingness of yourself to guide you down a path, right? So whether that is you're changing the structure within your team, you are going to go after business that may seem ridiculous to go after because the numbers don't indicate, but you have to believe and lean into that knowing, because without trusting your intuition and leading with intuition, I believe that's where things fall flat sometimes, right? And when you're not willing to take risks, and risk being listening to your intuition, not only is it doesn't have to be about big gains, but it also has to be about really believing in yourself and knowing that inner knowing, that inner guidance, that inner compass is correct. You don't always need the books to dictate the way to go. They can be the secondary component to following your intuition. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. And yes, it does make sense.
I see and I understand, especially for large corporations with leaders, CEOs, that at times the bottom dollar comes into play. the worried about the stakeholders and the shareholders comes into play. But that could keep them from taking and trusting their intuition on an air quoted risk that could actually create massive change in a positive direction for the company. And being okay with sometimes listening to your intuition. Maybe there's a dip. I'm using big money here, thinking maybe there is a dip in income for a moment, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't correct. It just might take a little time for the steam to pick up, for it to come into play. But I think that's where people can get stuck and business can get stagnant, and leaders can ultimately end up not being actual leaders because they're not listening to themselves and trusting.
I appreciate that correlation too between the quantifiable statistics, bottom line, and why it's important to trust your instincts and your gut to override that sometimes. Leadership guru John Maxwell, he talked about how he switched companies or even careers 3 or 4 times in his life. And every time it was this drastic pay cut, this different type of responsibility. And he couldn't really explain on paper why it was the next right thing, but he knew in his gut, in his heart, that it was.
Yeah, I love that, because what it helps us understand is that there's this journey and this knowledge growth pickup that comes from the change, and it doesn't have to be this linear path of growing to become a leader. There are things that he learned and experienced in these other areas that actually made him a better leader today. And I think not enough people are comfortable with that because we believe we should do things, that it makes sense and it's logical, but it doesn't always have to be that way. And to have the courage to say you're going to do something different than what everyone else is doing because it's right for you. It's very much aligned to living and following your passions, because to that same point, making a job switch that may not make sense, but it lights you up, means that you're actually living your passion in that moment, which means that you're actually living your purpose. Because I'm also a firm believer that if you're doing what you're passionate about, you're living your purpose, and that you don't have to seek it further out. It's not something that you have to attain. It's just being who you are today, but really listening to your heart and doing what you're really energized to do. So I love that story because it really is the truth of, I believe, intuitive leadership.
I love intuitive leadership, yes. And I really appreciate too the emphasis on the path isn't linear. A, that would be super boring. But B, I think that's part of our intellect saying, this is the next step. And now you have to make more and you do this and so on and so forth. But you brought up such a great point that there are things we have to learn or sometimes relearn and then maybe learn again because we didn't learn it. And we just have to keep going through that until it gets us to where we're actually supposed to be. And maybe the CEO isn't the end all be all, when in reality, there are so many ways that we live out our purpose and live out our passions that have nothing to do with that.
Yes, I'm going to say it. Amen. That is funny because when I work with clients, that is sometimes what we're talking about. Sometimes it's wanting to do their passion so they can start a business or start a side hustle. But sometimes it's actually bringing their passion into work, and figuring out how can they do it at work. And other times it has nothing to do with how they make money at all. I always use this one client as an example. She loves to bake. She doesn't bake at work or for work, but when she is baking and she's doing what she's passionate about and she has the time and finds the time and creates the space to do so, then she gets these creative downloads for her job that support her in her job. She also feels more spacious when she's at work and able to be more present at work because she's been doing the thing she loves. She's not making a living off of it, but she is finding the time and creating the space to do the thing that is hers.
And I love that it's something that's separate from how she makes money, because I think society is headed in this direction. It's currently society now where all of our hobbies now have to be our side hustles and have to be a way that we make money. And it's just always, how are we taking things that we love and that we're passionate about and ultimately kind of ruining them by putting all this pressure? Like, this creativity can now no longer be this creativity. It now has the pressure of needing to sustain me financially in my life.
Yeah. And again, I agree, because we see everywhere that you have to, in order to be amazing, you have to be bringing your passion into a business. And then that has to be your 6-figure plus business. And for some people that is true and correct, but not for everyone. And to normalize that your passions can be separate from work, they can become your work, they can be completely detached, but it's about doing the thing that lights you up, whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. I love that. And amen back.
Thank you.
What do you think are the holdups for people when it comes to following their instincts?
The holdups are fear. The holdups are they believe they have to rationalize it out, that it has to be something that they can only do when they retire because maybe it doesn't make sense. The holdup is not creating boundaries around your space and time so that you can do it. The holdup is, and this falls under fear, but maybe even being afraid to tell people what you really want to do, whether it's being accepted by family, friends, whatever that is. It's also that it should be this thing and it's not the should be. Again, that all falls under fear in my eyes, but that is a big thing that keeps people back. The other thing is feeling overwhelmed and not knowing where to go or how to take a step or how to take action. And so that can hold you up versus saying, I'm going to seek help to figure out how to take a step or what action I'm going to take. It's too much. I'm not going to do anything about it.
So if someone's gut instinct or intuition tells them to go with a certain decision, what would you recommend are some tools that they can use to articulate that to others who don't share that same perspective?
If you get that gut instinct to do something that others don't agree with, just first and foremost, be okay with people not agreeing with you. It's not for them, it's for you. And that can, again, be scary, but it takes courage. It takes courage to say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Prime example, when I was first uncovering my intuitive gifts, the woman who became my mentor had invited me to go to a meetup that was called Intuitive Jam. And I was at the time too nervous to tell my husband what I was doing or that what was even happening. So I would tell him, I'm going to the meetup called the Jam. Eventually I started to share more when I got more comfortable with it, but it wasn't for him to need to know at that moment. So that's the first thing I would say. It's just know that it's not for everyone to know. You keep it to yourself if that's where it feels the best. The other thing that people can do is identify a handful of people that you feel safe sharing it with. At some point when I did start working with my mentor on my intuitive gifts, one of my assignments was to find some friends, tell them what's going on, and ask them if I could practice with them. And I was very selective. I picked a handful of friends that I knew would accept me no matter what, and I reached out to them. I also, at that point, was in coaching, getting my coaching certification. So I would also always encourage, get a coach, get a therapist, get someone that is going to be able to support you, to either empower you, cheer you on, or just hold space for you to take action.
It also reminds me of Sarah Blakely. She says that when you first have a business idea, that you should mull it over, start to build different things out, but think about it as your own for 1 year before you even tell anyone about it. So I really appreciated what you had said about it's not for them, it's for you. And then to get those trusted people, because there are a million people in the world who are going to tear something apart. But as you're building this foundation in trusting that intuition, trusting those instincts, that you need that supportive community.
Yes. And also knowing that you might pick your trusted friend and they still may ask questions and they still may hear you or guide you in a different direction. And they may make you feel like you're going to be derailed, but you can still lean into and decide to lean into taking a step, even when it feels a little funky, even when it feels a little scary and your friend may not actually understand. That's just a thing to put on your Rolodex to say, maybe they're not the one to ask those questions to.
Yes, I know I have friends like that who certainly, they care about me. So they're trying to also think of other things that could be a problem and don't realize that they're giving me problems that the idea or the passion is not ready to solve yet.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And they just might not get it. And that is also okay. Because I know that someone listening to this may not be talking about baking bread. They may be literally thinking about making a massive shift in their career where money might be at stake, or, I'm doing this in the air quote, but it's a thing that even I've thought about. Insurance might be at stake, even though you can get insurance outside of having a job. It is a possible thing. It can be done, but it can be a scary thing. And so if you hear these things, it can stop you from moving forward versus saying, I'm going to put that in the Rolodex. I'm going to find evidence to prove that that's also wrong. Hence, I'm going to find evidence to prove that I can actually get insurance outside of having a big, bad corporate job. I am still going to do the things I need to do to take a risk, take a step, and I'm going to do that. So calling that out, because you might be hearing this, someone might be hearing this and be thinking, sure, that's great. Mari and Natasha are talking about something like baking bread or something like painting something easy. You're not thinking about my particular thing that is way more scary. People can't know. I have clients that feel like it's hard for them to come out of the closet with their spiritual aspects of what they want to bring into the world, because what will other people think? People know them as a particular type of a person. That's scary, yes.
So what would you say is the role of confidence when it comes to trusting your gut or your intuition?
I would say the biggest piece is it starts with practice, because when you practice, then you can become more confident in what's happening. So again, thinking about your intuition, trusting your gut, start maybe with something small and then see what happens. And then say, oh yeah, for you said your solar plexus. When you feel it in your solar plexus and you think, oh, this is just something you're writing off, and you trust it, and then you see, oh, well, look, interesting, I trusted it, and it actually was right. Okay, I'm gonna try it again. That was right again. Interesting. Knowing that sometimes you might trust something and it might not be quite what you thought. It doesn't mean that it's not true, that your intuition is not true, but that's when you start to say, let me ask a few more questions. Was I really listening to my intuition, or did I listen to my brain? Did I rationalize before I did something?
During that time in my life when I was refusing to admit that that was my intuition, just all of that rationalization of it's not that, it could be anything but that. And I don't know why that was such a problem.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing that we talk ourselves out of what we know to be true.
When it comes to this, do you think that there are gender differences?
I think that's a good question. I think that there is a perception of gender difference. It is a matter of how much and how willing you are to lean into listening and trusting your intuition now. I would say if you think about kids, it doesn't matter if you're a girl or a boy, you have intuition. You just grow up and are taught different things. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It may show up differently, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
I find that even my language, when I'm asking someone a question about their intuition, is different depending on which identifying gender I'm speaking to. So if it's someone who identifies as female, I tend to call it intuition. But if it's someone who identifies as male, I tend to say things like trust your gut. I just naturally did that, and it typically resulted in good things. But it wasn't until actually you and I were going to get on here and talk about this that I really thought about, yeah, I really do that, almost like to make it more comfortable or quote unquote safe for that person to feel the feelings.
Yeah. And I understand using different language based on who you're talking about, but I don't think that it changes your ability to connect to it. I do think, though, that when we say, again, trust your gut, that sometimes that's where things get challenging. Because if you don't feel your intuition in your gut and you are taking it as a literal thing, I need to feel it in my gut, you are missing your own internal signals. And so that might be where inner knowing becomes a language that feels more neutral, connecting to your inner knowing. What does your inner knowing say? How does it show up for you?
What would you say is the cost of not trusting your intuition?
That is a good question. The cost of not trusting your intuition could be disappointment. It could be not listening to your heart and following your passions. It could be not so sound investments. It could be so many things. Buying the lemon car versus the practical great car. It could be dating the wrong person for a really long time because, you went on date number 1 and you had the gut instinct red flags, but you rationalized it out of them being shy, or it's just the first date, I'll give them another try. And then 2 more red flags happen at the second date, but you're like, it's just me. And then by the 3rd date, or a month in, you're dating this total loser jerk because you didn't listen to your intuition on date 1. It could be so many different things that show up just because, and I don't want to say just because it's not just because, it's because you're choosing not to trust yourself.
I love that you use the example of red flags on dates, because there are red flags everywhere, and we do just explain them away because intellectually we think we want this other thing. Oh, I really want this specific job and I want this to work out. So we ignore all these toxic things because we think that it's this other end result that we're after. So that's such a great correlation.
Yeah, you see it in jobs all the time. You go to an interview process and there's some red flags, but either your ego gets in the way because, the job pays a lot of money, or there's a title that is so enticing, whatever that might be, but you're not actually paying attention to how you were treated by the recruiter or how you were treated by the manager or the wait time or any of that, to even starting the job. And I've spoken about this before with, my soul-sucking job that I had. Everything was great. Everything was easy. My first red flag was in a meeting with a very, very senior leader when I asked a specific question about their vision for the newly created role that I was taking. And it was very, I don't know, I didn't really think about it. And that was a major red flag that I went and spoke to some people about, who then told me, no, someone that level doesn't think about that. And not to worry, but it was a red flag. And I allowed that to not be something that I took more seriously because I rationalized it out, right? So it can show up in so many different kinds of ways.
That example also just really made me think of all the other examples I hear or that I've experienced where if we ourselves didn't rationalize it away, other people help us in our journey of rationalizing things away. And so it's really interesting how we're all like subconsciously in cahoots to have this linear life with this linear progression.
It's what we're taught, and it goes back to the shoulds. What are we supposed to be doing? The shoulds of the life. I saw this a lot when I was in university recruiting, students saying either a business major because their parents said they have to be a business major, or because it's the thing that makes the most sense. But when you talk to them, you find out like they actually want to be a teacher, or they really wanted to go into art, and they aren't doing that. So now they're down this path and they feel stuck. but now they got to become an analyst or a whatever and do this thing that doesn't even light them up or bring them joy because they're supposed to.
What leadership or coaching advice would you offer current leaders in any organization?
I know the first thing I will say is that you are going to need courage to take some steps and to really trust your inner knowing and to lean into that. The second thing I would say is that it doesn't have to happen all at once. It can be baby steps. We think we have to get to the end result tomorrow, but it's just baby steps, one step at a time. It requires fearlessness to go against the grain and trust your intuition and to trust your inner knowing and to not shy away from that. Being an intuitive leader, it's okay to be you and to be different and to go against the grain. But you have to have courage. You have to have a sense of fearlessness to be able to take a step forward. And it's just one step at a time.
Do you have a book or a resource that you recommend to others?
Funny enough, this is just a book that I loved, and it's not a leadership book in any means, but I think it lends to the trust in your intuition and to some degree that belief in the mystical and the power of taking steps, which is The Alchemist. I love that book. And if you want it to really be a journey and wow your senses and brain, I invite you to listen to it because the narrated version is Jeremy Irons and it's just magical. And so you'll be taken away while you're listening.
If people want to reach out to you, how and where can they find you?
Love it. People can definitely reach out. I'm happy to connect. There are 3 ways that you can reach me. I am out on the social media world of LinkedIn. You can just find me at Mari Roberts. On Instagram, you can find me at Mari Roberts Life. And if you are wanting to learn more about how you can work with me even more deeply, you can also find me at marirobertslife.com.
Awesome. This has been so fun. I love it.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. It's always fun. And it's fun to talk about intuition in different ways.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. For more leadership development content, you can visit my website, natashacheyenne.com, where you will find my leadership journal with dozens of articles and the Cultivation Cafe, which is always growing and has leadership frameworks, book recommendations, and inclusion and mental health resources. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or at Equipping Leaders Podcast and on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Join me next week for another episode.